Hello everyone, this is Putnam County historian Larry Tippin. We've been doing a series on the tiny towns and vanishing villages of Putnam County. And today I'd like to talk about Portland Mills, a very significant early community in Putnam County. You can pause the recording anytime you want as we're looking at the various newspaper accounts and so forth if I get ahead of you, or you can drag the slides back to read a previous slide. The historical marker at Portland Mills that tells a little bit of the story. Marker stands in the corner of Ford Township, Park and Putnam County line, once the center of a thriving rural community, Portland Mills, settled in the early 1800s. Tells about the church and the mill. So Portland Mills was in Greene and Union Townships of Park County, and Russell and Clinton of Putnam County. Looking at a map, 1864, courtesy of the Library of Congress. It's available online if you'd like to see it. We show Raccoon Creek coming down in Russell Township and then Clinton. It goes back up, and right in here is Portland Mills. 1864 has a detail of the community. You see the road is not like it is now. It comes down, then it goes north, and then this is the road that went off. The marker we were looking at was about right here. And there's a bridge, the Christian church, the sawmill, and the grist mill. Notice the county line and the road don't correspond. The road's a slight angle to the county line. If you want to pause and read some of this, then you can see some of the early settlers of the community. In 1879, pretty much the same, except I want to note that the road goes north almost to Raccoon Creek, then it went east along the south side of the creek, and there was a school on the Park County side. Portland Mills was one of the early communities settled. About 1820 came Austin Pruitt and Clark and Bill Butcher. There's a very excellent publication called Portland Mills Remembered and a few other Portland Mills books, and they're available at the Putnam County Museum gift shop in Greencastle if you'd like to purchase one of those books. They're very excellent. And in that book, they talk about 5 families came to in 1823 with these people. And then at that time, it was called Portland Settlement, or just Portland, but they were certainly not first to live in this area. Physical evidence indicates the Native Americans were here long before European settlers came. In fact, there were probably quite a few of the native tribes that we'll discuss in a minute, up and down Raccoon Creek, and there were probably some of the early fur traders long before Putnam County became a county. And there's a unique mill hole where it is believed the natives ground or milled their corn using sticks or tree branches. And you can still see it today. It's on private property, but we could show you where it's at if you want to see it. But it's kind of a mill hole they had where they ground their corn using sticks and tree branches. There's also a cave along Raccoon Creek referred to as Devil's Den, or their writings on the wall, typical of the style used by the Native Americans. They also believed fur trappers, traders coexisted with the natives, possibly prior to 1800 in the area. But it appears that the natives had mostly gone off the area by the time it was settled. Photo from Portland Mills Remembered of Norma Jean Sauter, who passed away just recently at the entrance of Devil's Den. It's a really interesting map. Published by the Department of Natural Resources, showing the influence of the Indian names and then their history on our current names. This is West Central Indiana. Up here we're Thorntown, what they call Place of Thorns. I can't even pronounce that Indian name. There was a trail that went down to the Wabash, partly along what is now Raccoon Creek. Newport had a very large trading post And then you had the Sugar Creek Wea Indians and various other tribes. Zoom in on this a little bit. Then Putnam County, Raccoon Creek just went across the northwest corner a little bit. The Indian name was apparently Shikoya, if I'm pronouncing that right, which translates to lean raccoon or thin raccoon, which is how we got the raccoon name. The primary tribes in the West Internet were the Delawares, Shawnee, and the various tribes under the general umbrella of the Miami Nation, the Wea, the Miami proper, Yankashaw, Neal River. The Wea name, by the way, derived from an Indian name, which basically meant place of the whirlpool. Portland Mills remembered. We have documentation about an Indian village port had been located near what was to become Portland Mills, believed to be Miami Indians, or one of the Miami tribes. Is the proper Miami tribe, but then there's a larger Miami umbrella, so you could have the Wea, the Potawatomi, and so forth. Upstream encampment of the Potawatomi, who are also under the umbrella of the Miami tribes, located between Morton and Raccoon Creek. Then further upstream, village of Shawnees, located 2 miles to Parkersburg, the village of Chief Peter Cornstalk. There's a marker at Parkersburg that describes that. They also had a large encampment, Ladoga, close to headwaters, Raccoon Creek. And then they're talking here about the trail that we were just looking at on that map. This is the millstone that was taken from the mill near where the historical marker is at Portland Mills. And this old road is the one that went west toward the covered bridge and into Park County. And then just across the street from that, basically, it salvaged a rock from the foundation of the bridge. It's a very, very nice photo. It says the way it was. This photograph, believed to be more than 100 years old, shows the once thriving town of Portland Mills in Park County, Park and Putnam. In the foreground left is the old mill, and then the church, Christian church here on the right. It says sometime in the 1930s, believed that Sheep Paget and his brother Earl acquired the mill, which was no longer running, and turned it into a dance hall with live music, live band, until about World War II. And some suspect that card playing and gambling activities may have actually been going on in the second floor. But the first floor was a family-oriented dance hall. It's also stated in Portland Mills remembered there was some evidence there was a crude trading post of sorts in the area, originally known as Portland, prior to Indiana becoming a state in 1816. And in 1819, Chauncey Rose and Captain Andrew Brooks started construction of a grist mill, a sawmill, and a distillery. By 1823, they were completed doing business. Samuel Steele then started a trading post to serve the natives that were still in the area and the white settlers that are coming in. Salt, seeds, gunpowders, very important items to pioneers. Things that you could not grow yourself, you had to acquire through trade at a trading post. Then Samuel Steele and his son George built a dam across Big Raccoon in 1825, started to operate the first grist mill and sawmill in the area. Then the settlement then became even known as Portland Mills because of the mills. Business was good as settlers from miles around bought grain for ground into meal and flour, and the natives apparently adopting some of the white man's ways brought in furs to trade for meal, or they would bring in their corn to be ground. Samuel Steele did a thriving business, continued to sell. The best sellers were salt and calico. Salt at that time was very expensive. A barrel of salt was worth about as much as 80 acres of uncleared land. And some travelers, upon arriving in Indianapolis, asked of the availability of calico. They were told, you need to go to Portland Mills, 50 miles to the west, to get calico. This is a very neat article in 1842. Proposals to carry the mail. The early post offices, the mail had to get from one to the next, and you didn't have railroads in the early days, or not very many railroads. And really, they had to be carried a horseback for the most part from one post office to the next. And what the post office would do is they'd have a 4-year contract for carrying the mail, and they would publish the proposals and the proposed routes in the newspapers at the time, and usually have a page, maybe 2-page. And then sometimes they had a designated route, later became known as star routes. And this is a particular one from Indianapolis by Danville, New Winchester, New Maysville, Bainbridge, Samuelsburg, Portland Mills, Rockford, and Montezuma, 72 miles, back twice a week. Very large route. Samuelsburg, by the way, was post office of Samuel Darnell at what we now call Hannah's Crossing, or 9 Mile. It's very interesting to see these proposals. The postmasters and their date of appointment in the Putnam County side were these people, who's kind of a who's who of the people of Portland Mills. Post office was operated from 1837 to 1904, when the post office came up with the rural free delivery, where they would bring the mail directly to the mailbox. Many of the smaller post offices closed because there was no real need for them anymore. But this was the Putnam County side. If you want to pause and read some of these people, that's fine. Also had listed, the post office did, in the Park County pages, Portland Mills, with some of the same postmasters, some overlap. Sometimes it was Park County, sometimes it was Putnam, then back to Park, and so forth and so on. And then we had some postmasters appointed in both counties on the same day. This is a publication called Appointment of Postmasters, 1832 to 1971, by the Post Office Department. This is the Park County pages and Putnam County. And you'll see Portland Mills and Park County. Alexander Ramsey was appointed in 1875 in Park County, and then also on that very same date, Portland Mills and Putnam County. So there's a little confusion about the post office. And then when the United States entered the Civil War, 1861, Portland Mills was eager to support the Union cause. It had been said this community supplied more fighting men than many other of its size. Newspaper articles for many years after, we see the Grand Army of the Republic holding reunions. And then the publication Portland Mills Remembers contained detailed information for the veterans that served in that war and many other wars. It's very interesting to read that. Sometime prior to the Civil War, Samuel Hart and Adam Sellers ran the big store. Also, Reuben Slavin and George Ng, I'm pronouncing that right, I hope, were operators of the general store at the same time period. And then in 1853, 1854, Alexander Ramsey ran the store. In the 1880s, the store was operated by Mr. Garver. Albert Spencer had recorded that Mr. Garver hired a man by the name of Cap Watkins to run a horse-drawn peddler wagon. It's believed to be the first peddler wagon in the area. Fire destroyed the store in 1921, and also the home of John Alexander, just in the south. The February 1985 issue of Park Place magazine has an excellent article about this, a lot of details if you'd like to see that. And it was the father of Ray Rivers who then took over and built the new one-story store building to replace the one destroyed by fire. After a short time, he sold the store to Fay Spencer and Harold Gibbs, who operated it in the 1920s, who continued the practice of having the peddler wagons, huckster wagons, if you will, on the regular routes in their homes throughout the country. This was a great convenience and very much appreciated by the farm women and others who could have goods delivered right to their home. Then Spencer and Gibbs also installed 2 hand-operated gasoline pumps to sell gasoline, the numerous automobiles, and the few trucks in the area in the mid-1920s from the store. Bay Spencer kept a ledger of the daily sales of the store by customer. In those days, it was the normal business practice to buy goods on credit rather than pay cash. And then if the store owners were lucky, it was settled up at the end of the month. The store was sold to Lester Sewell in 1931. And Portland Hills remembered there are pages of copies from the ledgers, which is very interesting to read. Lester's wife Vera worked full-time in the store. Then Lester added a wing to the grocery store on the south side and also expanded the huckster business by adding trucks instead of a horse-drawn hack. And then he had 4 pedal wagons covering the 4 townships, Green and Union, and Park, and Clinton, Russell, and Putnam, and then also as far north as southern Montgomery County. Very nice photo. This is 1938. The Regal store has the 4 huckster wagons. And then also the bigger truck who went to Holman's at Terre Haute to get the goods to bring back to Portland Mills to sell out of the store, or by the huckster trucks. You see the gas pumps and so forth. This is from Portland Mills Remembered also. Lester Sewell bought the Portland Mills School, was sold at auction for $200 in 1937. He was the owner of the Portland Mills grocery store in the 1930s. The grade school, grades 1 to 8, was closed in 1928. I always like to read the newspaper articles from a community. Gives you a lot of good information and sometimes highlights the tragedies that have occurred. This is 1870, where a young man by the name of Ramsey, living 2 miles north of Portland Mills, had his hand severed in an accident running a threshing machine. This is 1872. The post office, because they had the designated routes to carry the mail, which is predictable times and isolated, most part, usually just a small path through the woods, sometimes following the streams and so forth. It was a very severe penalty if you were to accost one of the contractors carrying the mail. The first offense was 5 to 10 years of hard labor, and the second offense, they would find a rope and hang you. It was also a very serious offense for the mail carriers themselves to go through the mail looking for money or other valuables, which is what happened here. This Richard Schouder, who's a young man of 18, had gone through the mail that he was carrying, apparently took some cash, and he got a lot of trouble for this. This is from the 1874 Park County history. In Putnam County, you know, we have an 1879 history, which was the first compiled history of the county. Park County had one published 1874, saying that John Adams settled as early as 1820 in the forks of the 2 Raccoon Creeks. Then Judge Steele settled at Portland Mills 1821, but was preceded by Moses Hart about 1 year earlier. Also, it's kind of interesting to note that James Kelsey and Francis Dixon built Dixon's Mill, which we now call Mansfield Mill, or just Mansfield. We have some news from Hathaway's Mills, which we believe was just upstream up Raccoon Creek from Portland Mills. Talking about some news from Portland Mills, where John Blake had died. And you could pause, by the way, if you'd like to read these. And then Jack and Columbus Clodfelder bought the old Patterson McGill farm for $4,000, and so forth and so on. In 1882, there's a equal rights type society, equal suffrage society is what they called it, with Portland Mills including in this district where Susan B. Anthony spoke. So that's kind of an interesting historical side note. Again, if you'd like to pause and read that, you can. 1885, about 5 o'clock yesterday morning, a great light was discovered south of here, which came from a burning building, which was the distillery about 2.5 miles south of Portland Mills, had burned. And they thought that it was arson. And then 1886, they're talking about called the North Salem this week, was the GAR post there, rendering the Spy of Atlanta. The Spy of Atlanta was a very popular 6-act military allegory produced in the years following the Civil War, based on a book by A.D. Ames, which was published in 1879. It's very, very popular at the time, a 6-act play kind of thing. In 1884, 8 members of the Greencastle Grand Army of the Republic, which was the first post in Putnam County, went to Portland Mills to organize a post there. 16 names, one road, Alexander Breckinridge being chosen as the commander. Post named Scott Post 305. Let's talk about that. Established February of 1884, dissolved in 1912, named in honor of William H. Scott, but one could argue the honor was in favor of the entire George Henderson Scott family, who sent 4 sons to the Civil War in 1862. William and George enlisted at 21st Indiana Infantry, James in 87th, and then Simpson in the 43rd Regiment. The youngest one, Simpson, was killed in action in 1864. The family lived near the Mount Pisgah Church, north of Portland Mills, section 19 of Russell Township. I've been doing some research on the Grand Army of the Republic, and I've gone to the state archives and for all the posts in Putnam County. We'll talk about that at a different time. But the actual application and charter of the church, which was granted, or the GIR post, which was granted in February 19, 1884 for the Scott Post in Portland Mills, Park, and Putnam counties. These were the officers. Though these young men went to the war, many of whom had never left a farm before, had traveled extensively, become very close to friends, and after the war, I can't even imagine what they had seen, but they missed the military structure, and they also missed being with their fellow soldiers who become good friends with, their brothers. And they kept a military structure of the Grand Army of the Republic post, including commander, vice commander, and so forth, so on. And these are the 16 veterans of the Civil War, the first 16 who chartered the Portland Mills post. If you'd like to pause that and read them, you can see it's very nice. You can see which company they were in and everything. Then this is the actual certificate, also at the state archives, for the Scott Post. Very nice. The Scott brothers and others were mustered in when a company came to the Portland Mills Church one Sunday during services, while the services were going on, recruited new members. The Union officers of small detachments brought right into the services and proceeded to recruit young men right then and there. Simpson Scott, being the youngest of the 4 brothers, lied about his age so he could join his brothers as they marched off to war. According to Jinsey Bing and Malcolm Romine, there's interesting stories about this. Basically, we believe that the minister was in on this, so he knew they were coming to recruit these young men. Newspaper articles from 1887 talking about the Grand Army of the Republic post, and also a new railroad, which now surveyed to be run 1.25 miles south of town. Let's read more about this. It said 11 men were surveying the branch from the Monon to the coal fields of Park and Clay counties. It was to pass a mile or so, 1.5 miles, south of Portland Mills, and they think they're going to get built within 90 days. And then they continued in November 1887, talking about the new branch of the Monon, surveyed, and then about it a little bit. Never got built, never happened. They're talking about the Grand Army of the Republic, and then the appointment of postmasters and so forth, so on. And then in addition to the Grand Army of the Republic, some of the companies had their own reunions. Some of the companies were basically recruited at one location. There were enough people to make a company. You have to went off with your neighbors and fought in that company. So this is a company C is having their own reunion in 1909. They're getting a little bit older now. And Malcolm Romine used to tell a story about his grandfather, Jack Clodfelder, was apparently in the church when the recruitment happened in 1862. And also, over the years, the Grand Army of the Republic would march down from the store to the church. And then later, after 1900, there were fewer and fewer. It was quite a spectacle to see them march down to the church for their services from the Grand Army of the Republic. 1910, the Putnam Mills Bridge has been thoroughly repaired and repainted under the direction of Commissioner Thompson of Park County. It was built in 1856 by Henry Wolfe, one of the Burr bridges, which Park County has many. This is an outstanding photo contributed by Malcolm Romine, believed to be taken in 1953, showing the church behind and underneath the bridge, the covered bridge, was no longer there. Very nice photo. 1857, this is an editorial, not necessarily Portland Mills, where this gentleman's ranting that we don't have enough good bridges. Well, it had a major flood in 1857. Before you had bridges, you were cut off for a week or two until the water went back down. Mails couldn't go. You couldn't get across to see your neighbors or anything, and you needed bridges. And they're talking about Park County doing a better job than Putnam at the time, but they're goading the Putnam County Commissioners to get some bridges and improve the roads. So about the old cover bridge. Prior to 1856, Raccoon Creek isolated the north end of Portland Mills from the south, particularly, of course, in the times of high water. There began a movement to build a bridge to link the communities and see that the mails got through year-round. The ultimate location selected was on the Park County side of the county line. The community was overjoyed that the Park County Commissioners constructed this bridge. The bridge underwent repairs in 1909, 1922, 1939, but the flood of 1957 damaged the foundations of the bridge, and then the subsequent construction of Mansfield Dam raised the water levels at the bridge to the point the bridge was no longer suitable. The bridge itself was deemed stable, even though its foundation was not. So the bridge was moved in December of 1960 to replace the Dooley Station Bridge, which had been destroyed by arson. At its new location, the bridge was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1978, listed as the second oldest bridge in Park County. The bridge then fell victim of neglect and deterioration, and there was a major fundraising effort by private citizens and the Portland Mills Homecoming Association to have the bridge repaired and reopened. 1996, the Park County Commissioners refunded the owners for the effort and paid the money to restore the bridge themselves. This is a photo of the bridge. It's on County Road 650 North in Park County, about 10 miles due west of Russellville in Putnam County. You see the approach to the bridge, it's gravel road, and then the approach, and then the historic sign, and my sweetie's sitting there for the photo. And then a close-up of that. It says 1856 when it was built by Henry Wolfe. And it's still called Portland Mills Bridge, even though it's 10 miles away now. And it says cross this bridge at a walk, meaning they want the horses to slow down and walk, and not trot your horses right through the bridge. Then there's the historic marker. Again, some of the same information we've been talking about. Pause if you'd like to read it a little bit more. How about the dam? Situated in the lowlands along Big Raccoon Creek, Portland Mills was prone to flooding. It was hit by these devastating floods, several of which were noteworthy. And in 1957, that flood, setting in motion a series of events that would eventually become the death knell of the once vibrant community of Portland Mills. At one time, it was starting to look like the two dams, or the two parts of Portland Mills, would be isolated from each other after the dam was built, and then the water was erased from the reservoir, the Oak Creek bed being too low for a bridge. Cecil Hardin of Covington, who represented the 6th Congressional District, United States Congress from 1949 to 1959, was instrumental in getting a new steel and concrete bridge over the new reservoir that links both parts of Portland Mills. I was always curious who the Cecil Hardin was. I found out a little bit more about her. This is from a newspaper article in 1952, where Cecil Hardin's running for Congress. This from Covington. Then a little bit about her. She lived from 1894 to 1984, a long time. The only female congressperson from Indiana during the time she served in the 1950s. She was born Cecil Jane Murray and married Frost Hardin, who was a car dealer in Covington and a very well-known businessman of the Covington area. It's possible that the M in Cecil M. Hardin represented her maiden name. Then the new bridge, which is built downstream much higher than the old bridge, allowing Portland Mills to be linked to the north and to the south. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about the early history of Portland Mills. Again, if you'd like to know more about it, there's several excellent publications at the Putnam County Museum gift shop.